Hello, everybody. Welcome, and apologies for some technical difficulties we were having, but we're so glad to see you. And we are delighted to have with us today Kathleen Peters. So as you know, this is one of the series that APPAM is conducting about research communications, today, we're going to be hearing from Kathleen Peters, who's at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, about this topic of how we can communicate our research widely. How can we speak so that we are heard? We know that as researchers, we put a lot of time into the work we do, and we want the results of what we've done to be communicated widely. We want to talk to many audiences, but often we have to make that transition from stepping out of our rather technical jargon, the insular world we've been in, where we've been thinking about our research very in a focused way, to now going to the multiple audiences we want to interact with. And we really do benefit from hearing tips and strategies from experts like Kathleen, because this is not something that naturally we're often taught how to do. So we're going to really appreciate what you have to tell us about strategies we can use to connect with our audiences. And we'll do this in a way that we'll have questions in the chat or however you would like. Kathleen, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Kosali, for that nice and kind introduction. Thank you to Florence Lacroix and the APPAM webinar organizers, particularly John Schwabish and Leslie Afori, who have facilitated my participation. And I'm super excited to be here today. I am an employee of the Federal Reserve System, and I'd like to just start off with a moment of educational outreach and note that the Fed is a non-political institution that includes 12 independent regional reserve banks whose collective goal is to ensure the economic experiences of all Americans are represented in the formation of monetary policy. We have 5 main functions at the Fed, and you can find them on our website, prominently displayed, where we hope that you check us out. I also need to take a moment for the legal stuff and state for the record that the views in this presentation are my views and do not represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta or the Federal Reserve System. In addition, any examples in this presentation that mention economics or monetary policy are used solely for the purpose of illustration. Now, I am not an economist. Indeed, I am not a banker, a financial analyst, or engaged in monetary policy. My doctorate is in ancient Southwest Asia and Eastern Mediterranean studies. In other words, don't ask me for financial tips. I am, however, an editor at the Fed, where I've worked for about 3 years. And before that, I was a university professor, where I gave frequent presentations, most obviously to students in large lecture halls, but also to civic groups and at academic conferences. In the capacity as a veteran public speaker, I'm here with you today. Now, I know it's kind of weird to begin a talk about public speaking with a book recommendation, but here we are. It's difficult to broach public speaking without acknowledging the cultural phenomenon of TED Talks, the consummate platform for public speaking that has generated a thriving secondary industry of guides, manuals, and how-to books. There's one book that's notable, and it's called Quelle Surprise, TED Talks. And it is authored by the current head of TED. And though it is a guide to preparing your own 18 minutes of fame on the stage in Vancouver, the advice is adaptable to other forums and formats. It is a fairly comprehensive guide, again, written by Chris Anderson, the head of TED. And in case you're interested, the audiobook is 7.5 hours long. If you have a long commute like I do, it's kind of perfect. It covers everything from organization, audience, oversharing, cadence, clothing, um, scripting, laser points, anxiety, accent. Do you need a Q&A? Do you need a podium? Do you need flashcards? Will you have a monitor? What about your gaze? What about your tone? What about your ego? What about pace? And yeah, it's a lot. It covers a lot of ground, and it can be really overwhelming. It's the rare person who can address, yet alone master, all of these elements. So today I'm going to focus on one single strategic technique, one that will help you organize a beginning, a middle, and an end, that will unify your content so that you can stay focused, and one that will help create a connection with your audience and increase your chances of being heard. But for the big reveal, we're going to do a little time traveling, one of my favorite things. We're going to go back to ancient Greece, and we're at war. The Peloponnesian War was a Greek civil war, and it pitted Athens, a cultural and philosophical powerhouse, against a coalition led by Sparta, the military powerhouse. The Athenians were the aggressors who provoked the war, but they suffered heavy losses from the outset. With morale low and tensions high, Pericles, the Athenian leader, stood before the citizens of Athens, presiding over a civic funeral akin to our Memorial Day. In his speech, he celebrated Athenian cultural achievements, emphasizing that the war was about more than treasure. It was about a way of life. He delivered in a clear narrative to the Athenians who they were, why they mattered, and what was at stake. In a time of chaos, he gave a clear purpose and call to action. That speech rallied the citizens, inspired patriotism, and shifted public sentiment. Though Pericles died early in the fighting and Athens lost the war, Pericles' speech has left an indelible mark on Western political thought, influencing countless leaders and thinkers, from Plato and Voltaire to our presidents John Adams, Teddy Roosevelt, Lincoln, Kennedy, Bush, Obama, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Most impressively to my mind is that Pericles has been the subject of at least 70 questions on the Jeopardy quiz show. That is half as many as Taylor Swift or Beyonce, which is pretty good for a guy who was a loser and who's been dead for 2,500 years. What was his magic? What was it about his speech? The enduring power of his speech lies in its storytelling. Pericles gave his audience the what, the so what, and the now what. And that's what we're going to focus on today. That is storytelling. Storytelling is a craft. It's an art and it takes practice, but it's also really doable. The what, so what, now what model, and I know how y'all people in economics and public policy love acronyms, so I'm going to give you one. The W, the SW, and NW model was developed by Terry Borton in 1970. And it's an outline for crafting your narrative. At this point, y'all may be saying, hey, I'm a data wonk. I am not a fiction writer. But I'll show you how you can apply this approach to your work. For starters, with the WSW-NW model, you now have an outline for your presentation or your speech. With part one, you have the beginning of your story, and that's the what. The introduction is where you establish your narrative line or your through line and create a relationship with your audience. Keep it simple and straightforward. Though your introduction is a really important part of your talk, it's not where you want to spend the bulk of your time. Provide a brief biography. Start with a concise biography that introduces you in a matter relevant to your audience. Highlight your most recent achievements and establish your expertise without reading every detail of your CV. At an academic conference, you don't need to establish your expertise in the same way you need to if you're speaking before a city council. So, include a brief bio, and here's a pro tip. Highlight only the most recent and relevant work. Next, address your subject, topic, and research problem or project. How much information you include here depends on your audience. If you're at a conference session devoted to public housing, you can move directly to your topic and research question. But if you're speaking at a city council meeting, introduce your subject first, for example, public housing, and then your topic, perhaps it's neighborhood quality and children's health, and then to the specific problem or project that you're addressing, maybe something like funding mobile medics for pediatric well care. Then set the stage. Provide relevant background information, a brief history of scholarship for conferences, or provide contextual information for city council meetings, such as recent city council resolutions on the topic, or the history of the issue of pediatric well care in that district. So, introduce your subject, your topic, and your research question or project, and then your pro tip, set the stage. The third part of your introduction is your why. This is an opportunity to create a connection with the audience and reveal a bit more about yourself and to dig into that storytelling. Why are you working on this project? What drives your interest in the topic? In sharing your own passion about the subject, you connect authentically on a personal level and you humanize what might otherwise be a dry academic subject. Often, our careers are guided by personal experience. It's okay to personalize your work, to share a short anecdote. For example, an expert on economic mobility and resilience might share, I grew up in Tornado Alley and saw how a lack of financial resilience exacerbated the impact of a natural disaster. So I began studying, and so on. Or in another example, quote, our rural part of the state was a pediatric healthcare desert, and it was challenging for my mom to access routine well care for me and my siblings. Now, as a public health officer, I run the mobile medical clinic program, getting healthcare to families in areas like mine. You can share your curiosity about a program, or about a problem or a research question, and in so doing, invite your audience, whether a fellow economist or a town alderman, along on your quest to track down answers. Sharing your why will help pique an audience's interest in your subject and communicate that infectious sense of curiosity. But as with other elements of your introduction, stay focused and be cautious. Don't overshare. Revealing too much personal information can alienate an audience, make them uncomfortable, and even question your professionalism. An example here would be if you were addressing healthcare access. You could share your own experience. Perhaps the online scheduler was down. Perhaps you weren't getting callbacks when you left voicemail, or there was a really long wait time to get an appointment. But you should never share what your appointment was for or what doctor you were trying to see. Recap, share your why. That creates a connection with your audience. And then step 4 of your introduction, wrap it up with your action steps. The audience knows your research problem or the scope of your project and your why. Now lay out the method or approach you used to tackle the issue, using action verbs and active voice rather than passive voice. Action verbs and active voice convey engagement, resolution, and vitality. So, wrap it up with your action steps, and the pro tip here is to use action verbs with the active voice. Say things like, I analyzed, I collected, I researched, rather than saying, data has been collected. or analysis has shown. I move now to part 2. So what? Why does your work matter? In a story, this is the part where action increases. We have rising tensions and a turning point that leads to the climax. Typically, there's a dynamic plot twist. And that's exactly what happens here with our model. At this point, the focus shifts from your why to that of your audience. What are their passions, problems, and areas of work? What is the relevance of your work to your audience's why? That's crucial. How will your work further their work? That's what your audience is going to be listening for. To understand their why, it's important to consider your specific audience, which may require some effort. If you're an invited speaker, reach out to the organizer or convener, as I did. If you're speaking to a task force, research the members' backgrounds and the project's overall goals. An elected official might want to know how your research impacts their constituency, while a civic administrator is going to be interested in how city authorities could use your data for budgeting and planning. A nonprofit community or foundation leader might wonder how they could employ your analysis to better serve their clients. For an audience of academics, consider where your research might intersect or build on their own work. Don't simply read your research paper. Frame your story to suit your audience's needs. And that's going to require editing, reorganizing, and reworking your content. Pro tips here. First off, you'll have a plot twist. It's all about your audience's why. Secondly, you're going to frame your story, and you're going to frame your work to suit the audience's needs. Third, you're going to dig to find the inside scoop. Ask or research who your audience is and what they care about. And lastly, focus. If you stay focused, so will your audience. I move to the third section of our WSW-NW model, and that is the now what. What are the next steps? Or is there a call to action? Your story comes to an end, but you have 2 approaches for your final words. Approach 1 is where you can share with your audience what you plan to do next. This could include specific research steps that you'll be taking, or a resolution that you intend to submit, or a policy that you plan to write. Approach 2 calls your audience to action. For example, you could ask city council members to sponsor your proposal or provide funding for a project. Consider creating a handout or even printing infographic cards with key takeaways and contact information. Request feedback and collaboration from fellow conference attendees. Create a network, such as a GroupMe, for those working in the same area of study. Pro tip: give your audience an action plan for engagement, whether it's through your next steps or through their own active involvement. Epilogue. Every good book has to have one. I'm going to conclude here with just a few brief pointers. First off, practice your talk, practice your presentation. Don't finish your talk the day of. Finish ahead of time and practice, 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 because practice breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds confidence. No one knows your material better than you. Practice in front of captive family members or friends, or video yourself. I think videoing yourself is super helpful because a video captures your cadence, your tone, your accent, but also your body posture, your gestures. And so it can be super helpful to have a video of yourself and work on your presentation skills that way. It also helps you with timing. Practice will help you with your timing. In almost all situations, you'll have a time limit. Do not go over your allotted time. It is rude and a disservice to fellow speakers. You may panic and try to speed through to the end. You may get cut off and never even get to the end. You may lose your audience as they lose patience, or even worse, walk out. I have seen it all. Pro tip there, do not go over your allotted time. Everybody gets nervous and everyone wants to know when you're trying to get better at your public speaking, how do you calm those nerves? My very first year of teaching, I stood on a stage looking out at 800 students, and I was a wreck. My senior faculty mentor, however, told me that it was okay, that even after 40 years of lecturing, he still got nervous. Why? Because he cared. We get nervous because we care, and that's a good thing. Embrace the nerves. Put one foot in front of the other. And once you begin your talk, it'll get easier. As for your audience, they've all been there at one time or another, and you'll have their support. So, pro tip for the nerves, everyone gets nervous, and it's a good thing. Visual aids. If you use presentation software, run an accessibility scan. Consider font size, and color tones for effective communication. I also recommend using scarcely populated slides. Your audience won't listen as closely if they're busy reading a busy screen. Lastly, you may not have the luxury of presenting a slideshow, kind of like me today with the technical problems. Imagine that you're speaking to a city council meeting. Prepare a handout in advance, maybe just a handout of bullet points with a brief introduction and a conclusion, mirroring your pitch and the what, so what, now what model. Or as mentioned previously, consider printing infographic cards with key takeaways and contact information. Now, I do put an asterisk next to that. When I was told about the potential audience for this webinar, I understand that many of you are probably graduate students or young professionals. Do not spend a lot of money on infographic cards. If your department has a budget for it, that's awesome. But I'm talking about, printer copies here. Just run down to your local Kinko's if they still exist, or FedEx, whatever it may be. Print up a few copies there. You can also distribute it online. If you have a forum or through a conference, you can post your handouts online, and that would be fantastic. If you want to provide a link to your full paper, you could always use a QR code. All right. So anyway, there are options that are budget friendly there. One of the last things I want to address is technology, and comfort there is key. Consider whether you prefer a roaming mic, a podium mic, or a standing mic. Think through what you're most comfortable with and reach out to the organizers and see what options you have. If you prefer pacing over sitting or standing, ask about the stage setup and what your options are there. This will also affect whether you need a remote clicker or should use flashcards rather than notes on 8x11s. And pro tip here is to not worry about what tech the other speakers are using. Use what makes sense for you. If everyone else is standing at the podium and you want to pace and still stay in the camera frame for recording and live stream, then do it. Pace your heart out. Comfort is key. Do what makes sense for you. Thank you all so much, and I would love to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. And thanks to the audience. Please feel free to either put your question into the chat or to use any of the features we have in technology, hand raises, unmute, whatever you would like. I'll get started asking one. I really enjoyed all those points you made and the pro tips you gave, because you give us something to say, okay, here's something to remember when you need that. So there's a lot that's available also as tips and guides from generative AI. Are there
Mhm.
any thoughts you have about how in today's age, when we go about conveying our messages, things that you think are particularly helpful? Love to hear.
I have lots of thoughts on AI, lots. So bear with me here. So first off, I just lead with use AI judiciously and mindfully. And I think in my experience and that of my colleagues, we have found that AI is very helpful for brainstorming, for outlining, and for editing for clarity. And it's also pretty helpful for grammar. It's not foolproof, but it's pretty good. I was part of a pilot program at the Fed, and I used AI for an intensive several weeks in my daily work. And I will say that the tech did fall far short in many aspects. So this is where I offer caution, particularly for those of you who are using data, you know, in y'all's field. This is data is sensitive, right? And it's also nuanced. It really makes a big difference. AI lacked nuance. Think of survey data where wording of the original prompt is very important. And if you put that into AI and ask for clarity and concision, it's going to take away all the nuance. All right. It does not wordsmith in the way that you have reputational risk involved and sensitivity. Also, we found that AI was prone to exaggeration and hyperbole. There is bias, there are illusions, and in my experience, it missed a lot of grammatical mistakes. In one paragraph, there were 2 sentence fragments, and it missed both of them when I asked it to do a grammar check. Now, when I kept fine tuning my prompt and I finally said, find the 2 sentence fragments in the paragraph, in the first paragraph of the paper, it finally found them, but it took a long time to do that. So don't rely on it if you're publishing your paper. You really have to verify, check and verify. I also want to note for folks in y'all's field, there's the issue of intellectual property. You all have proprietary formulas, data, and analysis. And once it's in the matrix, even in a secure system, in a secure environment, you can't get it back out. So just be careful with that. The other thing that I think we're all fairly mindful of is that there's an environmental footprint and there are energy costs to using AI. So I do like to see folks use AI for real work, but not for icebreakers, dad jokes, to look up a word, to write an email, or even compose your presentations. Studies are increasingly showing also that it's bad for our brain's muscle memory and our critical thinking skills. So again, AI is great, but be judicious and be mindful with how you use it for public speaking or any of your other work that you're engaged in.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. I see that there's a question, Joe. I wonder if you might want to unmute and ask your question that's about testimony. Also see more hands raised. I see Celiat, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So if Joe, if you're unable to unmute and ask, I'll go ahead and just ask your question that's in the chat. and that is, I don't know, Kathleen, if you can see it too. It's about testimony to Congress, given advice that the personal testimony of your experience is the important part of your letter. You back it up with stats.
Yes.
That would.
Yep. Exactly. You can share your why, but ultimately you have got to convince your audience that it resonates and is relevant to them, resonates with them and is relevant to them. That's a great example.
I see the message, Joe, and we're going to check on our end if there's tech we need to set up for unmuting. Sorry about that.
Yeah, oh, okay, got it now. Thanks very much, Kathleen. I'm going to follow up with you on another item offline, unrelated to this, but I want to echo your comment about the energy cost of using AI for just baloney. We used to call it dancing baloney back in the early days of the internet. But for real research, I think it's good. Comparing documents and so forth, I think it's very, very good. I think the one thing that's really important, and I'm going to have to get off before this ends, but if you can expand upon this, um, we need critical information to government officials. Government policymakers need guidance. And sending form letters that you just add your signature really don't do a lot. They don't add much weight to it. A month ago, the endangerment finding, there was hearings for why it should be repealed or not repealed and so forth. And I actually got in to give oral comments, 2.5 minutes, and what not in person, but it was on Zoom. And what I did is the night before, I created bullet points on the back of an envelope of what I was going to do, and I went through that. I didn't read anything, but I had bullet points that went through my arguments. Don't repeal the endangerment finding. Here's my background, credentials, and so forth. I've noticed this personally about ticks and mosquitoes on my property, because of a variety of reasons and so forth, and went to that. And I do know other people who have testified, like you probably have at some point in your career in front of Congress and other officials, and they said that personal testimony, your personal knowledge is really critical. There's a lot of stuff coming up. I just saw a message today about some logging activity and so forth, opening up public lands and whatnot. If you see anything like that, if you have some personal experience, cite that, but also back it up with reliable statistics. And I do appreciate that, but we really need more public comment, not just the talking heads and not just the form letters that you add a signature to, but that you have personal information and you're credible and reliable and so forth. Thank you very much. I appreciate this. Is very, very good. Sorry for not seeing slides, but you did a great job. I think I captured a lot here. That's kind of the best way to operate. I remember the broad details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. It also sounds like, Joe, in your experience, that the what model was effective in your engagement with the government officials.
I see one more hand raised, Celiat, if that's the way I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please feel free to ask your question.
Yes, hi. You pronounced it correctly. It's Celiat. Thank you. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for the suggestions and the tips. Thank you so much. I just wanted you to elaborate on something that it's of a concern to me. I'm still a student, so but I've had to speak a few times in public, and I wanted to know what would you suggest? You said it's normal to feel nervous, but I noticed that sometimes when I'm nervous, I tend to speak fast and faster than I would usually speak. So I wanted you to maybe like give suggestions on how to slow the pace so that the audience can easily grasp what I'm trying to explain. Thank you.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that you can do there. First off, again, practice. Just practice. And pace yourself with slides. It is helpful if that at that time if you have slides. And one of the things you can do with a lot of the software, for example, PowerPoint, is you can have those slides move automatically. That you don't have to manually shift the slides. So you know when you can move on to the next subject. And that helps to slow you down a little bit.
Okay.
And early in my career, I found that pretty helpful to have someone else operating the slides. I also had everything, again, early on, I don't do that so much now, but timed down to the minute. And I actually, out to the side, would have a timepiece. And I know this sounds a little OCD, but that's who I am. I would have, my watch on one hand, or a timer or a clock where I could see it. And then I would have the specific, if I was speaking for an hour, lecturing in a class for an hour, I would have from 10 o'clock to 10:03 on this information, and from 10:03 to 10:04 on this information. And I would click the slides appropriately. I know that sounds laborious. It takes a lot of time to do, but if it's a real concern of yours and a significant problem, you might want to dig that deeply into it. But otherwise, I think, again, the more you get used to speaking in public, the greater ease you have. The other thing that might make you feel a little better about it is that I advised never to go over your allotted time. You know what isn't a danger? Ending early. No
Yeah.
one complains about that.
Yeah.
Now, if you are speaking so quickly they can't understand you, then that's a problem. And I am from East Tennessee. I speak, or used to speak, very quickly with that hillbilly accent. And, it's an accent, if you're not familiar with it, where several consonants and a lot of vowels are optional. And I had to be cognizant of that as well. And I just practiced.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would make use of those tips. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And please continue to put questions or ask. But I've got another one for you, Kathleen.
Yes.
As we've been talking about ways that we stay to the content, I wonder what you have as advice for people who are worried they're going to forget the points. I think it was Joe mentioned writing points down on the back of an envelope. So are there stages of getting ready for a presentation you might talk about, which is step one, you want to make sure you know your content, and then it's
Yes.
organizing, and then how do we go on to that last stage of when we are up there, when we're in that conversation, remembering.
Yes. So first off, never ad lib. Don't ever ad lib. Unless you are the most sophisticated public speaker, and that is a rarefied few in the world who can do this. I do not recommend ad libbing at all, or going without notes. Okay. You could have your entire presentation memorized and you could get thrown off. So have notes in some shape or form, put them on the slides of the PowerPoint, carry flashcards, excuse me, whether it's in bullet point or whether it's actually in full narrative form, you can print it up. No one will ding you for having notes, particularly at a conference like APPAM. No one's going to ding you for that. And the last thing they want at a city council meeting is someone who's kind of rambling around or is jumping around because they've lost track. Even if it's carrying a few note cards where you put things, one item on each card, and that's it. And it could be a keyword to remind you, or it could be a sentence, or it could be a few bullet points. That's what you want to, that's one way to stay organized. Now, if you realize you've skipped a bullet point that you really wanted to get to, you could circle back to it at the end of your talk. During the Q&A, when there is, and there always will be, that pause pause, silence, nobody's asking a question yet, you can say, hey, by the way, I realized I didn't address this. And so I just want to take a moment to do that. And that's okay too.
Thank you. We've got a question from Lauren, and please go ahead and ask if you're able to. Hopefully we're good with the unmuting technology now.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just wondering how you how you determine what's sharing and what's oversharing, if the why for why you're doing stuff kind of has personal information at its core. And so I'll risk oversharing here. I work on disability employment. A big part of the reason is because both myself and my uncle are autistic. Saying that would go against your point about never say what the appointment is for.
Okay. So what you mentioned here is an exception to the rule, because it sounds like when you share your personal information there, it is actually a part of your work, a part of your research, and directly relevant to what you're doing. Now, that it is, it's a throttle, right? And, or a toggle. And it is up to you as the sharer to determine how much vulnerability you want to have out there. Now, I'll give an example of a presentation that I saw in May. And this person was speaking on AI technology. At the end of that presentation, we knew way too much about their teen daughter, even what they got angry about. We got boyfriend problem. I mean, all kinds of stuff. We knew their favorite coffee, where they like to get their favorite coffee. We knew their exercise routine. We knew their marital status and about the ugly divorce. We knew, their best friend, their best friend's mental health problems. It was one of the most jaw-dropping presentations that any of us had ever seen. And it shifted our focus away from the topic of AI and just to real worry, concern, sympathy, and empathy for the speaker themselves. And it was distracting, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It was so distracting that it distracted from the focus of the presentation rather than reinscribing or emphasizing the focus. So there, in terms of oversharing, I think it's the end goal. And it sounds to me like in your experience, Lauren, that what you're talking about is that it does further the goal and is appropriate and directly relevant.
Okay, so think about it in terms of the goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
To what end would you share that information? Yeah.
And Kathleen, I wonder how you think of it also as depending on the audience, because I would think if I am giving a talk to policy decision makers, they might be particularly interested in knowing what's the viewpoint you bring, what's the experience you bring in, as was put into the chat. But sometimes if you are being chosen to come and give a presentation because you have studied that topic deeply, maybe that's the relevant personal experience they want to know is, so how long have you been in the field? In what way? What have you worked on, as in what have you published on this topic? What have been your findings? And then can you comment on whatever the question is you're brought. So could it be?
Absolutely.
Sort of...
Because, I, for example, don't have a personal story that connects me to my previous area of expertise. Other than that, I just really liked it. So, I don't have a compelling story. I would shift to what you're talking about, Kasali, and that is, this is what I've done. This is what I've studied. This is my sharing, my authenticity. The overarching goal here is to humanize and connect, to humanize your project or your work and yourself, and connect with the audience and build that bridge.
I want to ask a question. Let's see, I just want to make sure I'm not missing
We've got one more hand up, I see.
Let me go to that list. I see. Yes, please. Yije, or please tell us how to pronounce your name.
Thank you guys. Thank you for your wonderful session today. I'm Ija, a PhD student at Georgia Tech. My question is, do you have any tips on, how to prepare for the QA part? That's the part I'm most worried about. You can prepare your slides, you can prepare for the presentation practice by yourself many times, but for doing the QA, you never know what kind of questions will come up.
Yeah. Okay, great question. And for the Q&A, because it's a wild card, right? Number one, and this goes into authenticity again. If you don't know, again, don't ad lib, and just admit you don't know the answer to that question. I would say that is first and foremost. Secondly, put yourself in the shoes of the audience. Look at any gaps or lacuna in your research or things that you just couldn't cover in the presentation. And they may ask, well, why didn't you do that? And you say, oh, well, I have addressed that elsewhere, or in my research I did, but I didn't have time to talk about it today. You can always plant a seed in the audience. If you know someone who's in the audience, you can hand out cards to a few friends with questions on them, even one, just to get the ball rolling. Another tactic that people use is to use AI. All right. Now, again, I'm a little concerned about putting your research paper into the matrix, but if you are comfortable with it and you put it in there, I've had colleagues who've had great success asking AI to predict some questions an audience of. And now here's where you need to get specific with AI. The prompt should not be just any old audience. You have to say an audience of economic analysts at a specific conference. And that will help AI generate more substantive potential questions for you. The other thing is you could poll friends. You could look at what drove your interest in the subject, some of the questions that came up, and some of the questions that are being tackled by current research and current scholarship, even if it's not in your purview. Does any of that strike a chord?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Want to make sure we get to any other questions people have. And as you're thinking about more questions, I want to ask my next one, which is about audience engagement, making your talk interactive, again, knowing that it will be situation specific. But suppose you're going into a setting where somebody has said, you might want to build in some audience participation. Go ahead and don't feel shy. They might say this audience likes that. How do you view that as making a poll on a slide, or just work it into initial comments? What have you had experience with advising people on, and what do you think they've felt about the different ways of doing that?
So there are successes and failures. I have seen people successfully incorporate polls into their presentations, but they've got to be relevant and you've got to circle back. Like you've got to incorporate the results from the polls into your talk. All right. So you can't I wouldn't add a poll in there just for fun. okay, or just as a filler, because people see right through that. In terms of it fitting into a talk, most of the time people don't have the time for a poll or for engagement. Now, actually, I was thinking about at the beginning of this presentation, having people put into the chat what some of their concerns have been or experiences. I was going to do that at the very beginning when we are all waiting for people to join. In that sense, it is a filler. It's something people can be doing before you start. You can put out the prompt, but here's the key. If I do that, I am committed to coming back to those responses at some point. And what happened today? We had technological glitches. I couldn't get my PowerPoint going. I couldn't share it. And we lost that time. So the last thing I was going to do was take the time that we did have, because we already had a late start, filling it with that. So, and then what if you don't come back to it? It was better to do the outline where at the end, people could put their questions in the chat or their concerns in the chat rather than at the beginning. It's not a bad thing to do. It can be a great strategy to get participation. I tend to lean towards doing it at the very beginning. Give me a show of hands. How many of you, that kind of thing. If you do something as formal as a poll, which is going to take time, you have to incorporate the results into your talk, or else people will see it as just puffing stuff.
I think you're already getting to another question I've wondered about, but I want to see if we can actually combine it with Lauren's question or comment. Lauren, would you like to share what you're commenting there about how, as is being done in my own university too, we have these arrangements with different Gen AI companies where our students are able to, and we are too, put certain types of material that there is a guarantee that it will not be shared outside. And
Yes.
so an example you gave of how we could put our paper, especially if it's been already in a working paper series, then there's no question. But suppose it's not yet been, but we want to prepare for the Q&A of such a paper. This is similar, I think, to students putting their own study notes into this setting and saying, now quiz me, now prepare me for the exam, right?
Right.
So I wonder, yes, Lauren, if you would like to, or anyone else, about how we think this is moving forward and how we'll be
Sure.
self.
So I can just describe
Yeah.
the situation at my own university, which is Rutgers. They evidently came to this agreement just this year, because I got the email about it at the beginning of the year, where they came to agreements with ChatGPT, Gemini, and I think there was one other AI too, but just not one that I remember because I don't use it. Where they basically came to an agreement where students are allowed to are able to access the AI through their student accounts. They're given for the most part free-ish access to a basic professional account, without a ton of upgrades, but it's a basic deal. And but we are supposed to specifically, they made sure to say this in the email, only use your student account for this, because if it comes from your student account, then it will not, then the company will not use the data to train their machines. And that's what I know about the situation. I'm a PhD student myself, so.
Thank you. And that's a good, maybe, as we know, we started a few minutes late, so we're going to just have you the full hour, but we're at the end of that, and this may be a good topic to end on, which is things are fast moving. We'll have to keep track of what other new strategies and tools we use. But we're really glad we had this time with you, Kathleen. Thanks for having shared your tips Thanks to everybody in the audience for being here. And please join us for other series we have. We have one on October 21st, where Jonathan Schwabish will be talking to us about better presentations. So thanks to everybody who puts this on, to Florence Lacroix, to Leslie Aforia, and to APPAM.
And